All right. Well, good afternoon, all. Thank you for being here. I realize this is the day 3 post-lunch panel, so I'm tired. I know we're all tired. I've changed my shoes. I'm in my sneakers mode now, but doubly appreciate everybody being here. And thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully, we'll have a good discussion here on CORSIA. My name is Udi Agarwal. I work at BP, and for the next by the way, you guys can hear me okay? I can't? Yeah, all right. I'll maybe lean in a little bit more. And for the next hour or so, I will be your moderator for this panel on CORSIA. We'll do this panel a little differently in just recognition of where we're all at in our conference journey and how we're feeling. So instead of just us talking at you, we will have a structured discussion. I'll keep us moving along. We've got some questions to get through with our panelists. But at any point, if you want to raise your hand and offer an opinion, if you've got a question, if there's something that excites you or you're confused by, please raise your hand and we will take questions. We've got Judy with us here who'll be able to assist us in just making sure that your voices are heard. So that way we can have a more robust dialogue and it's not just us talking at you. And that way also we don't have to hold questions for the end and we can have a dialogue here. We've got 2 excellent speakers with us who will introduce themselves in a second. But just before we do that, by show of hands, how many folks in this room are very familiar or somewhat familiar with CORSIA? Somewhat or very. Okay, well, we've got a very informed audience. All right, pressure's on, guys.
It's a tough crowd.
I know, exactly. Yeah, okay, very good. Well,
I see them ready for the questions already.
Right, I mean, we could just go right into questions. All right, that's great. Yeah, it looks like about 70–80% of us here are very familiar, which is great. So hopefully we can take more of your questions and have more of a informed discussion here. With that, Russell and Adelphio, go ahead and please introduce yourselves. And also maybe just start by giving us a brief overview of CORSIA from your perspective. I mean, how do you view it? What's going on? Just maybe a brief one-on-one on CORSIA, and then we could get in discussion. So maybe Russell, you first, and then Adelphio.
Sure. No, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for everyone for sticking with us here at the end. Russell Karras, I am a Senior Vice President and Head of Commodities at Expansive. So Expansive, we are a vertically integrated company with our goal to become and to be the infrastructure provider for environmental commodities. So we are the largest provider of registry technology for environmental commodities, both for RECs and carbon. And I personally manage our exchange business as well as our portfolio management system, which is called Expansive Connect, which is a meta registry that links into 14 different registries. And we process 1 billion environmental credits a year with a mix between RECs and carbon. And I also oversee our data business. I've been in energy environmental markets for 15 years, and prior to Expansive, which I joined 3.5 years ago, I was at CME Group, which is the other big futures exchange that deals in energy. And I launched the first CORSIA futures contract there, the GEO contract, back in 2021.
Great. Adelphio.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here. Really happy to have this crowd today. It's very experienced, and I'm scared about the questions already. So, Adelphio Ronci, working from ICE, Intercontinental Exchange, and Director of Environmental Products. And my responsibility is to be head of sales for our carbon credits product suite, which comprises nature-based carbon credit futures, the CORSIA Phase 1 futures that we're going to talk about today, and the newly launched registry service that we announced 1 month ago, which is Green Trace. We also have spot auctions. And the part that I work with in the company is part of the larger environmental portfolio. For those who don't know, ICE has the biggest environmental portfolio in the world. For the 4th year in a row, we transacted roughly $1 trillion in notional value and 20 billion tons in CO2 equivalent. So really proud to be part of the team and trying to replicate the success of my colleagues in the allowance market for the CORSIA future.
Great. No, thanks. Thanks both. I want to ask you a little bit about ICE CP1 contract. I'll come to you in a second. Russell, to you first. One of the developments that we've seen in the CORSIA market over the last few months has been the very successful auction of Guyana Arteries credits. How are the market participants at this point in time interacting with each other, and what are you seeing in the market, and could you speak a little bit to that ACE auction that you've been running?
Yeah, and it's been a slow road to get from the pilot phase of CORSIA to get to we're actually issuing credits, the compliance phase, because we had ICAO had to pick the registries and the programs, and then we were speaking about this before the panel. Then we had to understand exactly like what are letters of authorization, who's set up to, which countries are actually set up to issue them, do they have the right domestic policies in place, do they have the right registry infrastructure in place to actually account for them and administer those. And then we also had the introduction of like the guarantee aspect of it, which carbon insurers have been kind of developing and growing within this space, but now it's a requirement that there's some sort of guarantee mechanism on these credits. And some of that will be through private insurance, some of that will be through World Bank, through MEGA, through political risk insurance. And there's other registries that are looking at things like buffer pools. So it's been a long evolution with these building blocks slowly coming together. And we're fortunate that prior to the pilot phase, we signed a strategic agreement with IATA, which is the airline industry group, to create a exchange called ACE, which links into the same order book that we use for participants today. We're the largest physical spot offset market today. But it also allows us to do some customized things for the airlines, like lets them use their payment system, which is the IATA clearinghouse. So we've been working with IATA through this ACE platform for years, and once we got the supply, the first qualifying supply through ArcTrace, which is still the only credits that actually have a CORSIA tag in any registry today, we kind of created a customized procurement event that met the airline's buying needs, where an airline can't just go in and click on a screen and lift an offer. They need time, so we run these auctions that could take 4 weeks, and then they take 3 weeks to settle. And we had to do a lot of operational things in the back end to be able to deliver those credits. But I could say, IATA is a great partner and very well respected and used by the airlines across many different aspects, like ticket sales and a lot of the organization, and now things like SAF as well. So having that IATA backing, we found gave airlines some comfort to actually go out and start purchasing these credits and start to be like the first movers in this phase. So we've run 2 procurements events so far. We've had 35 additional airlines come in and participate. 15 different airlines have successfully purchased credits through the procurement event. And it's the volume is significant, but it's not in like the millions of tons yet, which is what we were trading back in 2020 and 2021. But it's a first step for airlines to start buying these credits and understanding how it flows through their systems, when they retire them, how will they report them. So it is definitely another building block that we need to get to, but we still have a long way to go. And I'm sure we'll get into details on that. So
Russell, just maybe to clarify a couple of things. So 35 additional airlines so how many total are now signed up to the platform?
So we have around 50.
From about 50 airlines, and you have already sold just about sub 1 million credits, so you're not in the millions yet, but somewhere around that. And could you speak a little bit of the
6 figures, yeah.
In the six figures. And what's the price? What was the clearing price of the last auction?
So I'm not sure what we publicly announced. I think but we announced around $22. Was the clearing price, which is pretty good. That's kind of I feel like that's a sweet spot in the carbon markets. That's where you see a lot of the nature-based removals trading as well.
Great.
So it's a strong price signal that airlines are willing to go in and buy at that higher price as well.
And the fact that about 50 are set up on that auction facility to go and procure more volumes, I think that bodes well, recognizing that it's not until January 2028 when they must true up all those obligations. So that's, I think, sign of good times, possibly, hopefully, to come in the future. Now, the other thing, Adelphia, to you, one of the things I do when I wake up in the morning is check the CP1 contract and the pricing, which has a different pricing. Liquidity is still anemic. We see offers and bids there, but not a whole lot gets traded. But there is a role for standardization and for having a liquid contract so that we can achieve some scale and price discovery. Could you maybe just give the backstory? Are folks familiar with ICE CP1 contract? Does that ring a bell? If you are, again, somewhat familiar or very familiar with ICE CP1 contract, just by show of hands, who is aware of that? Okay. So a lot of people aware of CORSIA, but maybe not as many aware of CP1. So we've got to do a better job of advertising that at Delphi. But maybe, yeah, just give us a backstory, the genesis story, how much is traded, what was the thinking behind it, what does the future look like for CP1?
Yeah, for sure. So even though you were the first one to launch Geo for phase one, for pilot, we were the first one to launch the phase one futures. It was in October 2023, after 2 rounds of extensive consultation to talk about the main feature of the CORSIA futures with lots of counterparties around the world. And in the second round, we want to get deeper in the discussion and try and understand the main 3 features the market participants really needed to tell us what they wanted. And the first question we asked was whether they needed a cash-settled future or a physically delivered future. And unanimously, everybody said that they needed a physically delivered futures because they wanted something to help them manage both the price risk and the delivery risk. Mm-hmm. And CORSIA phase 1 eligible emission units futures, that's the long name, but the short one is CP1, delivers CORSIA eligible emission units that can be used for cancellation towards the CORSIA obligation, which in a nutshell means that the units have to have a label. And for what Russell was saying earlier, the label itself means that it meets all the criteria, including whatever the registry requires for the label, because the registry labeling procedure is slightly different. It can be summarized as 2 routes to a label. Either you have an LOA and the corresponding adjustment already shown in the BTR report. In absence of the BTR report showing the corresponding adjustment, you need to have an insurance mechanism that you mentioned earlier. So either MIGA or private insurance that are going to be approved, hopefully soon. But not all registries were requested by customers. So it's a subset of registry that in ICE we call designated registries. And those are ACR, Gold Standard, and Vera. And the reason why those 3 were selected by our market participants is because we asked, we wanted to have the combination of registries that will guarantee at the same time the highest expected eligible supply and the highest expected participation rate. Participation rate defined as the number of firms that can actually take delivery. And as soon as the number of accounts that you need to have at the different registry increases, the number of companies that have an account at the different registry decreases. So this what it still is, because we've been asking this question for 2 years now. The combination of the 3 still is, for now, the best of the 2 worlds. The other feature that we needed to decide was how many expiries to give to market participants. Mm-hmm. And you always need to balance, again, 2 needs. You don't want to spread out liquidity into many contracts, but you need to give flexibility. So we landed into listing only December contracts. December contract because each November, starting in November 2025, the host country will send a report stating how many units airlines will have to buy. That's the first report. They will receive a second one in November 26 and the third one in November 27, including the reduction of the obligation that they have reduced by the use of CORSIA eligible fuel. So we want to give them the possibility to manage hedging at these 3 precise points in time, even though the compliance obligation is in January 2028. So we launch in December 25, 6, and 7. And I have to say, given all the uncertainty that we mentioned earlier, the contract, of course, I would sound biased saying this, but the contract has been, in my opinion, very liquid because every day we got prices not shown by only one person or to multiple counterparties showing prices throughout the forward curve. The contract traded more than 300 times since inception with the participation of the broker community as well, so a combination of screen and block trades, more than 1.7 million tons exchange, and we got open interest throughout the curve. More than 35 counterparties trading, and probably more than double have clearing limits that so can pull the trigger if they want.
Great. No, that's...
Can continue if you want, but
no,
probably
I mean,
have other questions.
that's wonderful. By the way, just for folks who joined us a little bit later, what I'd said at the beginning is we're not going to necessarily hold your questions until the end. So if anything here seems appealing, exciting, you want to respond to it, feel free to raise your hand and we'll come directly to you. We don't have to wait until the end. Thanks for that, Adelphio. Maybe just before I go to Russell, and by the way, now you have some competition because Russell just launched their contract for a futures contract as well. But Russell, you'll explain that in just a minute here. If there is a project developer in the room that wants to supply CORSIA credits through the CP1 contract, what can they do to bring that liquidity into the market? Is there a way for anybody with physical CORSIA credits to be able to sell that through the ICE exchange contract?
Yes, they can. They can do it two ways. So either they can get a clearing account from one of our clearing banks and then become a participant like anybody else and sell the futures that they want to sell. They can sell December 25, 6 or 7, and take a hedge position. At expiry, they will deliver the units. Or they can participate to one of our cleared auction that we're going to announce later in the year as soon as more spot supply is available. And those are the two ways they can interact with the exchange or with the contract itself, because the participation on the auction for CORSIA eligible emission units spot, of course, will interact with the futures.
Makes sense. And you'll be around a little bit later if anybody wants to come and ask you questions. And you may have a question, so go ahead. Yeah, ask your question.
If I may,
yeah.
You have a bunch we'd love to sell, but we have to get a host letter, like the elephant in the room, from the U.S., our host letter authorization, before we can sell them and get them stamped by ACR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that under the current administration. Oh.
I went to LinkedIn and asked. I got no responses from anyone.
Yeah.
Reached out to some folks. I mean, I guess we don't know.
Yeah.
Trump and the State Department is in
I think Doge got to them.
I know you're not the only one that's coming with this question, but we can't control this, meaning as an exchange, we just take the contract specification, and whether the contract specification are met or not, it's binary. So the only thing we can see in the registry is the label, and ACR requires, of course, like anybody else, the letter of authorization and a double claiming compensation mechanism, which could vary depending on what you choose. There are multiple ways, but of course, without the letter of authorization, you cannot sell into our futures. Well, you can if you want, but you have the risk of the labeling risk. It's on yourself, because at expiry, you will need to deliver a CORSIA eligible emission units that can be used for cancellation, which means you need to have the label. Otherwise, you're going to be put in default, pretty much. So.
Don't only two countries have the letters or something, Ghana and someone else?
No, there are multiple. Well, information is not easy to find and collect. There are a few projects with a letter of authorization. The latest estimates I've seen are roughly 18 million tons should have a letter of authorization. Of course, there are the Guyana credits mentioned earlier that already have a corresponding adjustment done, so letter authorization and the corresponding adjustment. But there are other projects that have one of the two things. So there are projects that maybe have the insurance, so the double claiming compensation mechanism associated to that exchange, to that registry, and they're waiting for the letter of authorization. I don't know whether we can say names, probably not. And there are others that have the letter of authorization and are waiting either to see the host country provide the BTR report, so the biannual transparency report, which was supposed to be out in December 24, but for least developed countries, they don't have a deadline, so it can still happen. If there are those two things, then of course you could also try and use other credits to meet your obligation. But if you want to effectively hedge and deliver, you need to have a label.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go to Russell, next, one of the things I woke up to this morning was the announcement from Expansive that you're launching your contract. So just maybe explain a little bit on what that is and the types of registries that would include.
Sure.
And possibly, I assume the gentleman's questions will apply to you as well, right? Like on ACR especially, how do you get, because most of the projects would be US based, and you're not going to get any corresponding adjustment possibly in the near future. So just maybe, talk a little bit about the contract you guys have just launched.
So Expansive is not a DCM, or not a regulated futures exchange, so we can't launch futures contract. We do work with CME Group, and we help develop specs, and we actually provide the physical delivery when the futures go to expiry through our system. But we couldn't launch a contract for, ICE was able to do it a few years ago now. We had to wait for that deliverable supply to be available because we're, same day spot, it has to be delivered. So it has to have the tag, it has to be available in our system. And the way that our system's set up is that we link to participants' registry accounts. So we've taken a little bit of a different path just because the supply is so scarce and there are all these different factors, and Delphio kind of alluded to it, even projects we thought would have had the letter of authorization and the insurance combo, it's taken some time to get there. So our goal has been to be as broad as possible to start. So we listed 5 registries in our press release today, which was ACR, CAR, ArtTrees, Gold Standard, and Vera. We may include others as well that are approved or that will be approved by ICAO. It's kind of this balance of, how many accounts do the industry participants have set up? Have they done due diligence on all these registries versus, more like theoretically you want as many as possible. You want it to reflect the policy like any other regulated market. So right now we're looking at it in that lens. Like, let's look at the policy and the regulation that the UN agency has outlined, which is ICAO, is that the UN specialized agency for the airlines. So we're trying to be as broad and inclusive as possible, especially since we have to go to physical delivery, and right now the only registry that delivers is ArtTrees. So through this procurement event, we've developed some ways to help customers that don't have registry accounts gain access to those credits. We can retire those on their behalf. And then we've took what we learned from that procurement event, and now we've started to work with the other registries on the same concept so that we can go out to a much broader group with a broader set of registries. So we're going to go live in April. We expect to have first trades around that time, but it's going to be slow, as you know. This is something that, I'd say just like with ICE, we're building towards the future. Like this phase is important because we're putting these building blocks in place, but then you have a longer compliance phase that's going to cover even more airlines coming in 2027. So we're still putting together the infrastructure today. We feel like this contract is an important step, and we had the head of sustainability and the chief economist for IATA on the press release today, Maria Owens-Thompson, and she's saying like this could be the price that airlines use, just reflective of what supply is today. And then ideally we want to get to a futures off that, but we have to build liquidity on the physical first and have a certain number of trades, because then working with CME, then that goes to the CFTC for review, and then it becomes a regulated product.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see the price dynamics, because the spot is trading at the moment, the Guyana, you mentioned 22, while our futures is in backwardation, the curve, so the spot.
Let's check what the spot
DEC 25 should be 15 and 16.
It's, offered 15, offered 16, bid 15.
And DEC 26, you have a market there as well. I haven't checked it. Probably it's
DEC
15.
26 is offered 14. I'm sorry, offered 1540, bid 14. Yeah.
And DEC 27?
Well, we can just go down the entire curve. I mean,
I haven't checked. It should be 15 offer still.
It's DEC 27 is
14 and 15.
14 and 18, actually.
18, so the offer disappeared.
Bigger spread there.
Okay.
Good. Well, that's your fun little market update there on pricing. Look, one of the things that gets talked about in carbon markets, especially voluntary, is quality, right? And certain buyers, tech buyers, other buyers, the voluntary market participants, insist on not just very robust quality criteria, but then they also want some charismatic features. They want, ecosystem benefits, core benefits, other kinds of things. just help us understand a little bit on the relevance of quality for CORSIA purposes, and that it's somewhat between a standardized contract, but also there are clear quality parameters. So how do you think about quality in the context of CORSIA, and especially in delivery into the contract? Is it simply sort of a most efficient, least something that just chins the bar, gets delivered, or how do you what do you make of quality discussions for CORSIA market?
Well, by definition, when you launch a future and with multiple registries, then you de facto giving an idea of what could be delivered, of course, and then it's down to market participants and understanding of the price dynamics of the different things they can deliver. The futures becomes by definition cheapest to deliver. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't like the definition cheapest to deliver, I prefer most efficient to deliver. Yes. That's how we do everything in life in these worlds. We're trying to use the most efficient tool to achieve our objective. So a compliant entity would expect from the future itself to receive the cheapest tool that will meet the compliance obligation, because the seller won't have an incentive to sell at a higher level there. It's not going to expect that you can sell that OTC to capture the different features. So the future will act as a benchmark for cheapest to deliver, and the OTC market will trade at the spread, capturing all the other features. So for us, quality, we don't interfere with the definition of quality. We take it as it's given by the TAB and therefore ICAO. So for us, either it has a label or not. If it has a label, it's deliverable, and then whether the counterparty is searching for something else, you can use our spot auction, where you can select different CORSIA eligible emission units that maybe are not the ones that you will buy through the future itself.
Yeah. So quality is binary. The most efficient units are delivered through the auction, the contract there. Russell, your thoughts on quality?
Yeah, I mean, when we were marketing GEO initially, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about the TAB, which is a technical advisory body. It's a group of experts for ICAO that essentially they run the screening process, which registries, which programs should be excluded within those registries, things around vintage year. And that's where, when we started having the original GEO conversations, where people had confidence they could buy that credit and they didn't care what it was. And at that time, when we had a futures market and we had a robust spot market, we were doing, someone put on a 50, 100 lot futures contract, and then they were doing 50,000, 100,000 tons against it. And that was happening multiple times a day. And that's why we were, as a spot exchange, we were up trading 120, 130 million tons a year. And it was a great market because it was commoditized. And you did see, to your point, you saw convergence of project types and qualifying, but then you did see basis markets emerge for kind of newer vintages, or not just for CORSIA, but we had nature-based products, and if they had multiple CCB accreditations, maybe those would trade at a benefit, or multiple SDGs. So you still had that basis market emerge, but we really need that to come back, or else this market is not efficient. When you think about a project developer, and it may not be trading a futures contract on ICE or on CME or anywhere, but they're, whoever they're going to for financing, or whoever their intermediaries are working with, will most likely be using those either as a price indicator or a hedging tool. It's a very important aspect of the market, and we don't get back there until we accept that this is a compliance instrument, and we have to accept that it's gone through this review process, and you can model out the demand, you can model the supply. It's a real market where you don't necessarily need to get into removals versus avoidance and ratings. And there's plenty of reasons why, for other reasons, that those things are really important and valuable. But for CORSIA, we should get back to that point.
It is a compliance market, global market, but also not all countries are participating equally, are they? I mean, there's a disparity and a distinction in how all countries are participating. I want to cover both the demand and the supply side. And Adelphio, to you on the demand side first, how are countries enforcing CORSIA? So what are you seeing in why an airline might be interested in buying these credits?
Sorry, this cough is killing me, recovering from a cold. Yes, so the CORSIA is a global scheme managed by ICAO. ICAO provides the standard recommended practices. But those standard recommended practices will have to be implemented into the local legislation together with the penalty for CORSIA to be applicable. And lots of countries have started to of course, implement and transpose those SARPs into local legislations. It's difficult to keep track, of course. Mm-hmm. They have the deadline in 2028, so they have to ramp up. Few notable examples could be Brazil, for example. They implemented CORSIA into the local legislation. They put out a penalty of $10 equivalent in reais. Plus, of course, they need to provide for the credits. And the interesting part, which explains the route-based approach of CORSIA, is that Brazil hasn't opted in for CORSIA. So just to get a step back, CORSIA split in phases, as we mentioned earlier, and phase one is still voluntary. 129 countries have volunteered versus 88 countries that volunteered the first year of the pilot phase. But once you volunteer for the phase, then the airline associated to the country will have to comply with CORSIA.
It becomes mandatory on the airline once the country.
It becomes mandatory.
Once the country has voluntarily joined. Yeah.
But the route-based approach makes it such that even Brazil, that hasn't opted in, if a Brazilian airline were to fly between two countries that opted in for CORSIA, then the airline is captured by the compliance obligation. So that's why it's important to have that in legislation.
And just as a point of information for the audience here, if you're flying from a country that has opted in, so meaning it's now mandated on those airlines, but they're flying to a country that is not, then that flight is not captured in CORSIA, right?
It's not captured in CORSIA because each country has monitoring and reporting obligation. Offsetting requirement is only on the pairs from the countries that opted in. That's the definition of the route-based approach. Another country that strikes me in terms of differences between Brazil is Canada. So they implemented a penalty of 25,000 Canadian dollar per flight. And I was reading about Japan, if I remember correctly, where compliance is needed in order to maintain your license. Mm-hmm. The UK, but I haven't checked that in the local legislation, so just seen it. I'm curious, I need to go and check it out, so don't quote me on that if it's wrong. The UK is consulting, and they are using the same penalty that they use for the UK allowance market, so £100. The EU has implemented already CORSIA in legislation, but now they need to have implementing acts for for the penalties that are done at the local level, so each EU country, but the SARPs are implemented within the EU legislation.
I think, in UK, in fact, I believe it's 100 is the base price. It'll get multiplied by an inflation factor.
Yes.
So the penalty itself could actually be, and it's not just like a percentage inflation, it's an inflation divided by some inflation in March of some previous year. So your actual penalty could be hundreds of pounds for each ton missed.
We'll see how it goes in the consultation.
It's a consultation phase, so if you're there, if you're responding to that consultation, please put in your comments. Tell them this needs to be a tight penalty so that airlines start reacting to it and use that stick.
Yeah, so hopefully all the country will implement the CORSIA SARPs, the standard recommended practices, in the same way, but they might diverge on the penalties, and we're already seeing the divergence on the penalties.
And because you're polite and you've been referring to it as the rules-based system, what you really mean is that each country has to adopt those into their national legislation, and those SARPs need to become sort of real, need to have real teeth, real legislation and real rules in each country, so that we can. So while this develops on the demand side, so while airlines while nations and countries come up with legislation and rules, on the demand side, Russell, you've done a little bit of work with countries on the supply side in setting up the domestic frameworks. I think that question is still very pertinent around, if you're developing in the U.S., what do you do about it? But put U.S. to the side, the political challenges here will consume most of the afternoon. But like in other places where you have done some work and where you've had some success, it seems an early success of countries stepping up and coming up with frameworks. And what does that look like on a supply side? And how do you select those registries And how does the selection of registries truly depend on those LOA requirements? So maybe just speak to the supply side of this.
So the registries, the registries are interesting because they've taken different pathways, and they're actually still in real time determining how they provide a guarantee. Because the way that it works today is that the onus should never be on the airline. That was part of the ICAO ruling, is that if the airline buys the credit and owns it with a LOA, it should have comfort in the fact that that will be able to use for CORSIA compliance purpose. So then you have to understand that if you have a letter of authorization, a lot of things can happen within a country, especially when you're thinking about like an LDC, where that could be pulled at any time, and then you think you're holding a compliant credit that no longer has that. So there's an element in CORSIA that you don't not only need the LOA, the letter of authorization from the government, but also some kind of backing behind that. And right now you have very different ways. So art trees, as Adelphia said earlier, Guyana has actually correspondingly adjusted those credits, so you don't need a letter of authorization. They've already factored it in for their NDC. But other registries, like you have the GCC that is going to set up a buffer pool. So they're going to have like a 15% of every project will have to feed into a buffer pool. You have the gold standard, which has come out and approved MEGA. So it's the World Bank Political Risk Insurance, which is very strong because the World Bank, obviously they set up like a traditional insurance policy, but they also have influence in those countries beyond just carbon policy. So they have strong enforcement mechanisms, I guess you could say, to actually make sure that the country sticks to the LOA. But now the other options, or one of the other options, is around private insurers, and the registries are still evaluating that. And how will private insurance play a role? And I think, as Adelphia said, there are plenty of countries that are starting to have that domestic framework in place and legislative policies in place to issue a letter of authorization. But you need that insurance piece as well. So we need to understand what will those requirements be, and those credits are still sitting on the sideline. They're trading in the OTC market, but at a discount, because firms are saying, well, once it gets the insurance piece to it, it has the LOA, which is a massive step, it still needs the insurance piece. It should go up, go up in value once it's CORSIA eligible. But we still don't know exactly what that'll look like. Hopefully, from what we're hearing, over the next few months, we'll have a better handle on that, and that's going to unlock a lot of supply. And I think that's not just good for CORSIA compliance credits, but in general, insurance is common across other commodities. It's probably something that's just better for the integrity of the market as well. And I think we'll get innovation on how that insurance is issued and applied and passes from one to the other, and how it's invoked. How do you deal with things like we've seen in the past, carbon prices go from, when we had NGO went from $4 to $16 to $1. How do you account for that in an insurance program? So the supply is, I think you're making more progress on the LOAs, and I feel like it's pent up waiting for that insurance piece to catch up to it. But I can say it sounds like the private insurers that are active in the market are actually working together on this and trying to get to a solution, because it's in everyone's best interest to have this moving forward.
In the supply-demand fundamentals itself, Adelphia, you spoke about possibly line of sight to 18 million credits that could be eligible for CORSIA Phase 1.
Yes, depends on which part of the report you look at. So you have the CORSIA eligible emission units criteria sets the basic rules. So either a credit meet those criteria and then can become eligible if it has a letter of authorization and the corresponding adjustment or the insurance, as we just heard. So you have a certain amount that is out there. The CAIP, the latest report from the CAIP, I think it mentioned 900 million, 2.5 billion in terms of eligible supply. But then if you lay on top the additional steps, the letter of authorization and the corresponding adjustment, the number shrinks to 18 million.
18 million, got it.
18.6 million. And I think they don't specify, but I think it includes also the corresponding adjusted credit from ART.
Okay.
Because the calculation I made on the letter authorization I see out there, excluding ART, was slightly lower. So I believe that those numbers
Yeah.
are pretty
So,
similar.
so about 18, so 20 million or so. We'll check on the art point. It might not include art just because I think Guyana would be issuing about 8 million credits a year for the next 2-3 years. So we'll double check on
No,
that.
but this one is for now. So
For now.
it's a snapshot for
Got
now.
it.
So the
So
previous
not-
one is the 2.5 billion, 900 to 2.5 billion.
Yeah.
It's everything that could become CORSIA forecasted by them.
Got it.
And then they say, what's available now?
18 million available now.
18 million, but 18 million are not all already tagged.
Agreed, yeah.
So that's,
Against a potential demand of about 100 million. which
yeah,
is also sort of what the
120
report
million
said,
for
120 million
phase
for-
one, and then it goes up to 1.2 billion for all phases. So
Yeah.
1.2 billion up to phase two, 120 million for phase one, including US, because US is still opted in.
Yeah. So let me quickly, market would be oversupplied, undersupplied for first phase.
Well, based on the numbers,
Just- yeah.
it seems balanced, because
Balance,
it's,
okay, very diplomatic.
seems balanced
I'll take
because-
the under on that.
Okay. And the audience just here, just to get a sense, do we think first phase CP, during the first compliance period, CORSIA, if you believe it'll be oversupplied, raise your hand. Okay, wow. And undersupplied, I imagine everybody here is bullish then? Wow, okay, everybody in this room, oh, well, some of you don't want to express your opinions, that's fine.
my balanced approach was for,
balance-
for,
oh,
for
sorry,
all phases.
Okay, well,
In-
now
Oh,
you're
now
trying to wiggle out of it. Okay, but is
It's
the
for all
rest,
phases.
the rest of the room believes there'll be balance? Did I miss somebody who believes the supply demand will be balanced? No, okay, so most people who raise their hands believe that it would be undersupplied. So lots of bolts in this room, that's great, okay. Well, get on with developing,
Yeah.
CP1 offsets then, that's great, okay.
And then just,
Yeah.
what you also have then is these mechanisms will also carry over for Article 6 credits.
Right.
And then you also have the rise of other compliance programs that are coming up that could also compete for
Like
some of the
Singapore
supply.
tax.
Yeah, and there are some credits that you may develop if it's like a blue carbon project, or another kind of nature-based removal, and you may choose not to sell it in as a CORSIA credit. If CORSIA is trading at $15 to $20 and I can get, $30 to $40 for a blue carbon credit, that's correspondingly adjusted, and you may see corporates say, I like that aspect, and, you can argue for or against it, but that may have like a kind of a go against the double counting piece of it, so they
Yeah.
may find comfort in having it. So it may not just be like airlines that are fighting for this supply. It could also be funds looking at like investment opportunity as well. So I think that's like what definitely keeps us going during these like difficult times, as we're like kind of slowly putting these building blocks, is that we see all these compliance programs coming. We finally have some guidance around CORSIA and Article 6. We're seeing compliance programs tighten. We saw progress in South Africa
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. We see a lot of activity coming out of Southeast Asia with programs in like Japan tightening
Yeah.
in 26 and 2028. So it'll be interesting to see how that supply gets distributed.
And of course, this one, it's really a good point. And also, if you look at the intersection with Article 6, not only the competition on the actual ITMO, because CORSIA units are international transfer mitigation outcomes that get authorized for a purpose, which is other international mitigation
Yep.
purposes. But the PACAM, so the Paris Agreement Credit Mechanism, is going to be assessed by the TAB independently.
Yeah.
So the PACAM will be into CORSIA as well, and therefore will be an interesting dynamics to see whatever is outside CORSIA and as PACAM goes, and inside CORSIA for the PACAM. So the different type of spread that you can have, because you have compliance demand on the side, and you might have demand from corporates that want to use this quality label that CORSIA is becoming, because all the layer that you explained earlier, so the insurance piece as well, in itself is a step of approval of somebody else backing financially a project for a purpose. So having the UN backing the scope, and having the EU also including it as a possibility to comply, it's interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if Apple's decision to retire, I think 100,000 Guyana art trees credits, was in some ways underpinned by the fact that CORSIA allows the use of Guyana art trees credits. So it may be, maybe not. I mean,
And then some of these credits will also have World Bank wrapper, and that's not just the World Bank, having a big stick that it can enforce it, but also they've had to conduct due diligence. A lot of the issues with credits now, we see this where we're trying to build like plastic credit markets and voluntary biofuel markets, is saying, why am I buying the credit? I'd rather just invest in the project so I know where the money goes. It's almost like some people have lost faith that when you buy that credit, the money's flowing into the project. And we know that when the World Bank reviews any project that they're going to invest in or finance or back, they have to follow the flow of funds. So it's almost like another kind of guaranteed graft in it.
Which outsource reputational risk to the label itself.
Yeah.
It makes them bankable. I mean, the insurance wrappers make these projects bankable and helps bring more liquidity. Just maybe as we think about next steps for CORSIA, one of the things we haven't quite discussed yet is the stop the clock, the EU ETS stop the clock legislation. So I'll be looking to you, Adelphi, on this. What's your prognosis? What does the landscape look like? If there's no real action on CORSIA in the US, what do you expect the EU to do on the stop the clock piece?
Well, the EU is...
and does maybe just even take a step back and maybe explain for the audience what that is?
The stop the clock.
Yes.
It's, so the EU has included international airlines into the legislation already, but I think in 2012 was the first time the clock was stopped, meaning that it was allowing CORSIA to develop. And now it's been reviewed several times, and the last time, now it's going to be 2026, where they're going to assess whether CORSIA is working properly. They didn't mention all the criteria that they're going to use in order to assess what functioning CORSIA means. For sure, there should be a participation rate, and with 129 countries participating already, I think the threshold could be reached, but we don't know. So effectively, I'm speculating on anything I can say because I don't know what criteria would be used. It was mentioned participation, but what the participation means, given that we are not at the end of the compliance cycle, has to be weighted with the other parameters. So the report will be published in July 2025, if I remember correctly. And on the basis of this report, they will assess whether CORSIA has worked properly based on the parameters I mentioned earlier, and then they will make a legislative proposal to what to do next based on the report. So what could happen is that stop the clock doesn't continue, and therefore international flights are captured into the EU ETS. That could be a possibility. Or it gets extended again, and CORSIA is given some more years to prove itself. But as much as I would like to say that I know what's going to happen, I don't. So that those are...
I'm still going to hold you to a question there, and I know someone's got their hand up. I'll just come to you in a second. What probability would you assign? I want to ask you a binary question. But where do you, because you're very good at wiggling out of it. So I'll want to know, do you think it's like a 60% chance, a 40% chance? Where do you fall on international flights falling under EU ETS and kind of in some way just smothering the CORSIA market?
I know you want to get a number out of me. You won't be able to because it's too difficult. It's too difficult. Yeah. Because look at also the law that was passed when the clock was stopped the first time, and signed by Obama, that makes it illegal for the US airline to comply. So what's going to happen? I don't know. Yeah. Well, in the current scenario, really difficult. It's impossible to say, in my opinion.
Russell, you've got a probability on this? Or anybody in the room, if anybody wants to offer their opinion.
I'll say 50%.
Ruben, you've got a...
I was going to ask, would the EU possibly accept CORSIA eligible credits as part in lieu of EU ETS allowances?
In the new ETS allowance, wow, this one is even more difficult question to answer. But what they're doing at the moment, they're effectively allowing an industry, which is aviation, to comply with the EU ETS using corresponding adjusted credits, which are called CORSIA. So whether this is something that will be replicated in the wider ETS scheme could be a possible. What do you think, Ruben? It's a possibility. What's your idea?
I mean, I was thinking maybe just for the airline part, that's a possibility. That's like a middle road.
Fair enough. You've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you about the law that's on the books
the 2012 law, the bipartisan support behind.
If they restart the clock,
What happens then?
I can't see anyone undoing that, so.
Yeah, exactly. So what's going to happen? Nobody knows. But how is it going to be enforced, implemented?
Yeah, not unlikely it's gonna be whole fleets of airlines that are grounded.
We might end up in another trade war with Europe. Go ahead, Olivia.
Hi, Olivier from Quantum Commodity Intelligence. I've got a question for Adelphio. Like, how do you feel about the next expiry? Because there's no physical supply into your contract right now, and only 9 months to go. So quite a short time. And did ICE jump the gun by announcing a contract before there is supply?
Well, when we announced the launch of the contract, it was done back of, as I mentioned, a very extensive market consultation and therefore support for the market participant that really needed the contract. We don't launch anything that is not client-led. So that's the first thing. And the rules of the game are specified in the contract specification. So there is nobody that is using the contract not knowing exactly what the obligations are under the contract. So the buyers, and you're talking about the sellers, so the sellers in the contract that are offering now, as you saw, $16, $15 per ton, they know that they need to come with the CORSIA eligible initial units at expiry. I don't know what they have behind those, whether they have letter authorization already in the pockets, ready for corresponding adjustment, they have the insurance. We just don't know. We know that the rules are really, really clear, and therefore they will need to come up with the units, or they will have to close their positions. And the clearing member is a layer of insurance that you have in the exchange. So the usual procedure is that the clearing member, the responsible parties, will go through to the clients and say, you have a position open in exchange. You know your compliance obligation, your obligation under the contract. If you cannot meet them, you need to close the position. So, not scared, because they know.
You're sleeping well at night.
Well, jet lagged, but.
Anybody else got questions on that? I've got one more thing to just ask. And okay, I'll quickly get that question out of the way, and then if anyone's got any final question in the last 5 minutes, we can take that. One of the design choices or decisions that was made when CORSIA was being established was that it really focuses on carbon neutral growth in aviation, right? It's not a net zero decarbonization design, meaning it's not, what you get obligated for is if you were above your 2018, 2019 baseline, 85% of the baseline, then they keep ratcheting that baseline down. But that's based on the growth of that sector. Adelphio and then Russell, any program changes you would like to see? So it could be eligibility changes for the next compliance period, but also just in the way CORSIA has established itself to more align, because this was designed about 10, 12 years ago. And I know folks like Ruben and others here were in the room when a lot of these decisions are being made. But just what's your sense in terms of the design of the program, eligibility changes as we look out, 4, 5, 10 years?
Well, CORSIA has to be reviewed every, sorry, this cough is killing me. So CORSIA has to be reviewed every 3 years. So the first time it was reviewed was 2022, and the first review brought a change, many changes, one of which was also the 85%, the change of the baseline.
Yep.
Now, the CAIP, I always forget the acronym, so I wrote it down, is the Committee for Aviation Environmental Protection, is the technical body inside ICAO that makes the recommendation for the changes, and they're doing the review now. So the numbers we mentioned earlier on demand and supply, it's part of the review to make sure that CORSIA is functioning the way it's supposed to function. As you mentioned earlier, there will be something to reconcile the carbon neutral growth and the net zero in 2050, because the carbon neutral growth is a short-term objective of ICAO. And probably the constant review of CORSIA will make sure that the CAIP advises on how to reconcile those two. So we don't, it's really, again, difficult. It's not that I want to say what I think, but it's really difficult to see the direction they will take to reconcile those objectives over time.
Yeah.
We saw strengthening of the baseline at the first review and changing the vintage.
Yeah.
Other changes, I can't remember exactly which one they were, but they can go different direction.
Fair enough. Maybe.
And it will
more
be
tight,
done in
yeah.
October 2025. So we will find out
Coming up in what,
later.
6, 8
in
months?
June, yes, in June, I think the CAIP will send the final report for then be discussed in the 40 and something ICAO Council in October.
Okay. Russell, any changes you'd like to see or expect to see?
Well, I'm hoping that they've done all this work. Again, I keep saying like the building blocks, but they've had to figure out a lot of things in the review for these last rounds. Like ACR came out first, I think it was like 2 years ago. We were talking about this around like the AIDA ECS European conference, and then everyone was scrambling, trying to figure out, oh, do these credits qualify now? And people were trading on it, some of them incorrectly, like thinking that those just qualified for the CORSIA phase. So we had to figure out LOAs, ICAO had to figure out like what happens if an airline buys those credits, and then the registry had to go back last year and prove to ICAO like how they were going to guarantee that. They had to like resubmit applications in order to get approved. That's why last year at this time I think we were all surprised, like Vera and Gold Standard weren't approved in that March report, and it was because they had to go back and figure out the guarantee part. So now that that's all sorted, what I would like to see is them make the recommendations and actually make them on time. And if they hit that deadline before we start, that would be great. But like this phase, we've had it's just been like incremental progress while we're actually in the phase itself. So it would be nice to go in to the the real compliance phase, the CP2, which is longer, and have like a clear idea of which registries qualify, where the vintage, and like people, airlines and market participants be able to like manage that risk accordingly and have a view on it and have it be less uncertain.
Good. Any questions from the audience? Great, go ahead.
Well, I would like to say that we're a project developer at Mexico. We are issuing almost 1 million credits from our projects per year. So I think that there's going to be credits. And my question is in another direction about the SDG goals from the United Nations. What is the expectation about it? Because some projects are documenting contributions and what's the expected level for that, for the contributions to the SDG goals.
In terms of CORSIA eligibility, it has to meet the criteria defined in the CORSIA eligible emission units document, which in turn says which are the registries that are approved and with the exact crediting periods, vintage range, and methodology exclusion. If the project meets the criteria, then it's eligible, provided, of course, you get also the letter of authorization.
Of course, we are all waiting for the host country authorization letter, but my question is about, is it a difference about a project that is contributing to one SDG goal or another?
So do you get a premium if you have more SDG goals? I think in CORSIA, they wouldn't really matter. I think it'd just be a sort of the same basis. I think Russ was speaking about basis maybe of something additional on top of that if a corporate buyer wants to buy those credits because they see more SDGs being met in addition to the CORSIA base eligibility. But for CORSIA qualification purposes, for becoming a CORSIA eligible credit, you're not going to get any premium for that. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Just I want to thank our panelists for being here. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks all. Thank you for staying with us.